What if the woman stepping off the train was the one person he was meant to protect, even when he swore he would never let anyone into his life again? The wind that scoured the Wyoming plains in late autumn of 1876 had a sting that felt personal. It was dry, sharp, and cold enough to bite through cloth and bone. It rolled across the gray buffalo grass in restless waves and slammed against the clapboard station at Dry Creek until every plank rattled. Colt Avery stood on the warped platform with his worn duster pulled tight, his eyes fixed on the iron tracks that vanished into the pale horizon. Colt looked like the land he lived on. Hard, quiet, weathered. At 34, he carried the weight of memories he never spoke aloud, and the ache of being a widower that never loosened its hold. His face seemed carved from sun and sorrow, but his sharp storm-gray eyes missed nothing. He was here only to end a mistake. His sister Ruth had arranged a mail-order bride for him in a desperate attempt to break his solitude. He had argued, resisted, and finally given up long enough for her to send a letter east. But he planned to fix that mistake today. He wasn't here to welcome a wife. He was here to send her right back. A little ways down the platform, Sheriff Harlan Pike leaned against a post, whittling wood with slow, tired strokes. The sheriff's badge on his vest was patched and dull, and his eyes carried the weary acceptance of a man who had seen the town rot under the power of Judge Silas Crow. He watched Colt with the quiet knowing of someone who had lived through the same storms. "She expecting a welcoming committee?" Pike asked. "She'll be disappointed," Colt answered, eyes still on the tracks. Pike grunted. "Ruth means well." "Meanin'? Well, don't keep the winter out." The train whistle cut through the air, long and lonely, echoing across the empty land. Colt's jaw hardened. He braced himself for the awkwardness, the pleading, the messy emotions he didn't have room for. The engine pushed into the station with a hiss of steam and the clank of heavy wheels. People stepped off, a few men with dust-baked hats, a family with wide-eyed children. Colt waited, expecting a hopeful woman with a carpetbag and shy smile. But the woman who stepped down was nothing like he imagined. She was young, maybe 22. She wore a dark traveling dress and a simple blue wool shawl pulled tight against the cold. Her posture was straight, almost proud, though her shoulders carried a clear weight. Her face was pale and thoughtful, her eyes wide and intelligent as they swept across the barren land. Freckles dotted her nose. In one hand, she held a tiny, worn trunk. In the other, pressed tight to her chest, she carried a metal tin box, as if it held her whole life. She didn't look like a mail-order bride. She looked like someone running from something. Her name was Norah Quinn, though Colt didn't know it yet. Inside that tin box were her teaching certificates, her ledgers, and a letter from the Dry Creek School Board, her lifeline out of Boston. She had come west for work, not marriage. She had come to escape lies told by a man in power, lies that nearly ruined her. She had come to start over. Before she could take a breath, trouble stepped forward. A burly man with a pinched face emerged from the station shadows. His eyes locked onto the tin box. He moved fast, too fast. He lunged and yanked it from her grasp. Norah gasped, reaching out. "No! That is mine!" The man spun to run. Colt was moving before he even thought. Something inside him snapped awake. 3 long strides, heavy boots pounding the platform. He grabbed the thief by the collar and jerked him back so hard the man stumbled. The tin box flew open on the planks and papers scattered into the wind. Colt slammed his boot down on the man's reaching hand. "Leave it," Colt said, voice low and sharp as cold iron. The thief froze. His eyes widened when he recognized Colt Avery. Everyone in Dry Creek did. He yanked free and bolted off the platform, disappearing behind the station. Sheriff Pike started forward, but Colt lifted a hand once the man was gone. Colt knelt and gathered the scattered papers. A hand-drawn map, a column of numbers, and a promissory note stamped with the seal of Judge Silas Crow. The sight made Colt's stomach twist. Crow again. Always Crow. He shut the tin box and stood. Nora's shawl had slipped off her shoulder. Her breath came quick, but her eyes, those serious, focused eyes, held no fear, only determination. "Thank you," she said softly. "He works for Judge Crow," Colt warned, handing her the box. Norah steadied her breath. "My employment letter was sponsored by Judge Crow." The school board's offer came through him. Colt stared at her, the truth sinking in. Crow wanted her here. Crow wanted that box. And that meant Norah Quinn had just stepped straight into danger, and Colt had stepped into it with her. "I'm Colt Avery," he said, the words stiff. "I was expectin' someone else." "Norah Quinn," she replied, offering her cold hand. "I'm the new school teacher." The wind howled, snatching dust into the air. The train pulled away, leaving them alone on the wide, empty platform. Dry Creek was a mile down the road, but with Crow's men lurking, Colt knew he couldn't let her walk. "My ranch is closer," he said unwillingly. "You can stay the night. I'll take you to town come morning." Norah hesitated, but the fear of the man who grabbed her still flickered in her eyes. She nodded. "I would be grateful, Mr. Avery." The wagon ride was silent. The land stretched in cold, endless browns. A lone cottonwood tree stood near a creek bed, the place where Colt had buried his wife and daughter. He didn't look at it. He couldn't. His ranch appeared finally, small but sturdy. Jonah, a boy Colt had taken in, ran out to take the reins. Ruth Avery stepped from the cabin, eyes sharp and warm, and immediately startled by Norah's presence. "This is Miss Quinn," Colt said tightly. "She ran into some trouble. She's stayin' tonight." Ruth softened at once. "Come in, child. You look frozen. Clear through." Inside, the scent of coffee and warm bread wrapped around Norah like a blanket. For the first time in months, she felt safe, but safety never lasted long in Dry Creek. That night, as Colt stood watch near the door, a single gunshot cracked through the dark, and the cabin window shattered. Colt's voice cut like a blade. "Down!" Norah dropped behind the table as glass rained across the floor, and Colt Avery walked straight out into the night, gun drawn, ready to face whoever had come for her. What if the man who tried so hard to keep his heart locked away found himself risking everything for the woman fate had placed in his care? The night outside the Avery cabin was black as coal tar. The wind dragged cold across the yard, and the lantern Colt held cast a trembling circle of light on the frozen ground. He moved like a shadow, his steps careful, sharp, every sense alive. The gunshot still echoed in his bones. Someone had aimed at the window. Not a warning. A message. But Colt Avery had lived through worse. He knew how to hunt danger in the dark. Norah stayed crouched behind the table, with Ruth's arm wrapped tight around her shoulders, both women listening to Colt's heavy boots fade into the cold. Norah's heart pounded hard enough to hurt. She was still gripping the tin box, her fingers numb around the metal. She had brought this trouble with her. She knew it. After a long, breathless stretch, Colt stepped back inside. His coat was dusted with snow. His jaw was set like stone. "He's gone," Colt said. He held a small, misshapen bullet in his palm. Filed tip, soft lead. Clay Murdoch uses this kind. Ruth gasped. Norah felt the name like ice sliding down her spine. "Clay Murdoch," she whispered. "One of Judge Crow's men," Colt said. "Crow ain't just after your job, Miss Quinn. He's after that box you carry. Whatever is inside, it scares him." Norah stared at the tin box, as if she could see through the metal. She didn't know why Judge Crow wanted it, but she knew those papers were the only thing she owned with any value. Her entire life was packed in that small box. Ruth touched her arm gently. "You're safe here tonight." But Norah wasn't sure anyone was safe from Judge Silas Crow. The next morning came early. Gray light seeped through the shattered window. Colt had barely slept. He moved through the cabin with a restless heaviness, checking the edges of the window frame, stepping outside now and then, scanning the horizon for movement. He didn't want people in his home. Especially not a stranger. Especially not a woman. But the moment that bullet tore through the glass, he had felt something shift in him. He didn't like it. It made him uneasy. It made him protective. Norah helped Ruth prepare breakfast, moving quietly through the cabin. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She carried herself with a calm that Colt respected even if he didn't want to. After breakfast, Norah insisted on helping Jonah with his reading. Her voice was soft but steady as she guided the boy through a simple sentence. Colt watched from the doorway, using the excuse of fixing a bridle to study her. She wasn't like the women who came west looking for husbands. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to fit herself into his life. She was simply trying to stand steady in her own. Around midday, Colt saddled 2 horses. "You're coming with me," he told Norah. "There's something you need to see." Norah followed him without asking questions. They rode in silence through the rolling hills until Colt led her down into a small, hidden canyon. Bitter spring lay there, a pool of clear water surrounded by willows clinging to the rock. Norah stopped her horse and stared. It was beautiful, quiet, alive. "It's the only water for miles that don't freeze hard in winter," Colt said. "My father claimed it, his deeds legal. But Crow's land is on the other side. He wants it all." Norah's breath caught. She finally understood what Crow was after. "This is life," she whispered. Colt nodded. "And men like Silas Crow aim to take life if it means power." They walked the edge of the spring. Colt showed her how wolves sometimes came down from the mountains when snow grew deep. He set a warning bell on a branch, and she helped him secure it with rope. Their hands brushed, neither of them pulling away. Working side by side was quiet, easy, dangerous. On the ride back, Norah kept glancing at him, noticing the way his shoulders filled out his coat, the way he scanned the horizon without ever seeming afraid. Colt felt her eyes on him, and for the first time in years, the silence between him and another person felt warm instead of heavy. That night, while washing dishes, Norah told Ruth about Boston. She told her about the lies, the rumors, the headmaster who had tried to ruin her when she rejected him. She told Ruth how she ran because she had no other choice. "I came here because I thought it was a place to begin again," Norah said softly. Ruth's face tightened with guilt. She dried her hands and swallowed hard. "You weren't supposed to come as a bride," Ruth confessed. "I wrote you as one." Colt didn't want a wife. "But I wanted him to have something to hope for." Norah stared at her. "I'm sorry," Ruth whispered. "I caused trouble for you." Before Norah could speak, the window exploded again. "A gunshot! Glass raining down!" Ruth screamed. Norah dropped to the floor, heart pounding. Colt grabbed his rifle and sprinted outside, moving like he had been born for danger. Minutes felt like hours. When Colt returned, he was breathing hard. He held another bullet between his fingers. "This wasn't a warning," he said, his voice cold as the Wyoming wind. "This one was meant to hit someone." Norah felt a cold weight settle inside her. Someone wanted her gone. Someone wanted her silent. Colt wiped the glass from the table with his sleeve. He didn't look at her, but his jaw was clenched so hard it trembled. "You're not walking into Dry Creek alone," he said. "From now on, you stay where I can see you." It wasn't a request. Norah felt something stir in her chest, something frightening, something warm. The next day, Colt counted his horses and realized 3 were missing. Taken, not wandered. He rode to Crow's property line and found tracks ending right where Crow's land began. Sheriff Pike's warning echoed in his mind. Crow won't let this go. Back at the ranch, Norah studied the papers in her tin box. She didn't know what she was searching for until suddenly she did. The columns of numbers. The fees. The contracts. She saw the pattern. She saw Crow's method. He wasn't just taking water. He was taking everything, piece by piece, until men had nothing left but their land. And then he took that too. Colt stared down at the papers, shock tightening his face. "This is enough to ruin him," he said quietly, "and enough to get you killed." Before Norah could answer, a horse rode into the yard. Clay Murdoch sat tall and smug in his saddle. "Avery," he called, "Judge Crow don't appreciate you harboring thieves." Colt didn't draw his gun. He didn't need to. He used his horse, fast, sharp, sudden, to unseat Murdoch and send him crashing into the dirt. It was a clear warning. Murdoch left with hatred burning in his eyes, and the storm on the horizon looked darker than before. That evening, Sheriff Pike rode to the ranch. He held 2 pieces of paper in his hand. A warrant for Colt, a warrant for Norah. "I'm sorry," Pike said quietly. "Crow's filed charges. I have to take her in." Norah looked at Colt. Colt looked at the woman fate had placed in his care, and for the first time, he felt fear. Not for himself, but for her. What if the only way to save a town was to risk everything for someone who had already taken hold of your heart? The church in Dry Creek was packed shoulder to shoulder. The people weren't there for worship. They were there to watch Norah Quinn stand trial under Judge Silas Crow's cold gaze. The preacher's pulpit had been turned into a judge's bench. The room felt tight with dust, whispers, and tension. Colt stood beside Norah, his posture rigid, his eyes hard as iron. He had been dragged into this as much as she had, and the anger simmering under his calm expression was something the whole town felt. Crow began with a voice smooth as polished stone. He called Norah a thief. He called Colt her accomplice. He held up lies like they were truth. Jed Carter testified, swearing he had seen Norah steal documents from Crow's office. It was a lie, but it landed heavy. When Norah stepped forward to speak, she didn't raise her voice. She opened her tin box and laid out the papers she'd carried all the way from Boston. She showed the town what Judge Crow had been doing. She pointed to the figures, the signatures, the broken men behind every page. "These are not stolen records," she said. "They are the truth of what he has done." A murmur rippled through the crowd. For the first time, Crow's smile faltered. Ruth stood next, explaining how easy it was to copy the court seal. Sheriff Pike raised the bullet Murdoch had fired into Colt's cabin and told the room exactly whose gun it came from. The people were on the edge of believing them until the storm hit. A deep rumble shook the walls. Hail, massive stones, hammered the roof. People screamed as the ceiling groaned. Colt's voice cut through the panic. "Everyone to the granary now!" He forced the doors open against the wind, led people through the storm, shielding children with his body. Behind him, Norah grabbed the church bell rope and rang it again and again, her small frame pulling with all its strength. The iron bell's rhythm guided the town like a beacon. Inside the granary, the storm raged around them. Then a gun flashed. Clay Murdoch. He aimed for Norah. Colt moved without thought. He shoved her aside. A crack split the air. Colt staggered back, breath knocked from him, blood staining his shirt. Murdoch reached for another shot, but Sheriff Pike tackled him, wrenching the gun away as lantern light shook across the room. Norah dropped beside Colt, her hands trembling as she tore open the medical kit. "Stay with me," she whispered. "He did. Barely." She stitched him with steady hands, each thread pulling them closer together than either of them knew how to admit. The storm passed. Crow's hold broke. The trial was postponed. The people had seen the truth, and Crow knew he'd lost. Weeks later came the storm of ice and fire. Crow's men sabotaged Bitter Spring, blasting a channel so the water would feed Crow's land instead of the town. Colt, Norah, Ruth, and Sheriff Pike rode into that freezing storm to build a dam from sacks of dirt and rock. They fought the rushing water with numb hands, their breath turning to ice. Then Colt saw the glow. His barn, his winter feed, his ranch. Flames rose into the night sky. It was Murdoch again. Colt had no choice. Water or fire. The town or his life's work. Norah didn't hesitate. "Jonah is in the cabin," she said. "We ride." Together they galloped into a nightmare of smoke and blowing snow. The barn was collapsing. Embers tore through the air. The smaller tack room was close to caving in, and Jonah's terrified coughing carried through the smoke. Colt tried lifting the fallen beam, pain shooting through his wounded shoulder. Norah pressed cloth to her face and crawled beneath the beam, grabbing Jonah and pulling him through the gap with a strength Colt had never seen in someone her size. They burst out into the snow, half blind, coughing. Colt grabbed Jonah and shoved him toward the cabin. "Get him inside," he ordered. Norah shook her head. Not alone. Together they dragged him in, collapsing on the cold floor. The fire raged outside. Colt ran back into the smoke again and again with buckets, choking on ash, refusing to let the flames take his home. He didn't stop until Norah ran into the smoke to pull him out. They fell together in the snow, alive. Barely. Inside the cabin, surrounded by the storm's howl and Jonah's soft breaths, Colt tended Norah's burn. His hands shook as he wiped soot from her skin. Her hair was singed, her cheeks streaked with ash, but she had never looked more alive. Her voice broke the quiet. "I'm still a virgin." Colt stilled. She wasn't saying it out of fear. She was offering him the truth of her life, her heart, her trust. He lifted her chin with a gentle hand, making her meet his eyes. "Then we'll go slowly," he said. "I choose you forever." Their kiss was soft, trembling, full of everything they had survived, and the storm outside broke. Days later, Crow fled. Murdoch confessed everything. The town took back Bitter Spring, forming a council to manage the water fairly. Colt was elected to lead it. Norah was offered the job of headmistress for the new school. Her name was cleared when a letter from Boston arrived saying the man who wronged her had been exposed. She could go back if she wanted, but she didn't. Her life, her future, was here. A year later, Colt built a new barn with the help of neighbors. The schoolhouse bell rang every morning from its porch. Jonah grew confident under Norah's guidance. And one misty spring morning, Colt walked toward Norah with a small silver ring in his hand. "This was my mother's," he said. "I'd be honored if you'd wear it." Norah smiled, a soft, radiant smile that held every mile she had traveled to get here. "I've traveled far enough to know what home is," she whispered. She slid the ring onto her finger. They married beside the new barn with the mountains watching. The rain fell like a blessing. The town cheered, and Colt kissed her with a quiet certainty that made her heart swell. Later, they walked into the high pasture and watched the Avery herd thunder across the open field. In the distance, the school bell rang, its sound crossing the plains like a promise. Colt wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Norah leaned into him, her heart steady. The Wyoming land was still wild, the winters still hard. But together, they were home.